A group of black expats got together and we did a YouTube video about what it was like to live in Rwanda. And then we got a panel of Rwandese to ask them what was it like to interact with us. It was kind of like, you know, what we think of each other, but you know, nothing, we were very mindful not to make a video that was negative or critical, because there's enough of that out there already. We don't want to add to that. We uncovered that we wanted to work together. We want to get to know each other better. And out of that emerged a group that's called Pan-African Organizing Group. That group is pulling together a series of programming for the community. So we started out, and this is still going 7 months later, so we started out showing films on Black history, on African history in particular. We just came off a month of studying How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, this wonderful book by Walter Rodney. He breaks it down about the cash crops, about the low pay for workers, about the taxation. I mean, they did everything they could to keep this continent poor and working for Europeans. That was the goal. And so when we see countries like Niger throw off those shackles of imperialism and colonialism, for us, that's a cause to celebrate.
Do you die fighting for your freedom, or do you die slowly? And that's what's been happening. So I don't have a problem with what Niger's doing. I think some of those old ass presidents should have been gone a long time ago. And how can Niger be one of the poorest country in the world? Second poorest country in the world. And we have all the minerals that are necessary to raise us up out of the mud. I say right on, brothers.
Uranium, which was not mentioned at all in this video.
True.
At all.
True.
Consider France gets 30% of their uranium from Niger. 30%. Niger, only 15%, 1/5 of the country has access to electricity. All of the electricity is being funneled outside of the country that's so rich in electricity means.
Listen, I believe in voting. I believe in voting over violence.
Yeah.
But you gotta do what you gotta do when you're hungry, okay? When your husband is dying because he worked in the uranium mines and the bullshit hospital France put up to treat him said, oh, nothing was wrong. We're not seeing radiation sickness, okay? So that's the kind of stuff they've been dealing with. But of course, that didn't get mentioned here.
If you look at the coups that have gone on in Africa, if you look deep enough, and you don't even have to look deep enough to see that it's been America, it's been the West who have been perpetrators of this. They are pulling the strings of their puppets. And the thing is, keep my foot on your neck. Africa does not need aid or America. And America has put its puppets in place so that anytime we get leaders that stand up for its people, they kill them. Yeah. So when you talk about democracy, I come from a what do you call demonocracy environment, living in America, and I've lived in Africa for 35 years, and I've lived under military rule, under democratic so-called rule, and who suffers? It's the people that are suffering. The leadership sucks big time. And those leaders need to be removed, because when you talk about democracy, they talk about the people, which is a bunch of BS, because we don't even see it in America.
I'm celebrating. And I want to see more countries do what they're doing. And I appreciated the fact that some of the other countries in the Sahel region said that if Niger were attacked, they're going to support Niger. That's the kind of solidarity we need to see. And it's no accident that these are younger people. As I get older, I look at young people and I look to them as the future. And so I look to young people who are serious, who are not just about music and fashion, and I mean, all that's good. But you know, politics is what governs your life. And it's important for people to understand that, okay? So I look for young people who, such as yourself, you want to make documentaries. That's terrific. That is terrific. We need more of that. Africans need to speak in their own voice about their own continent. I didn't realize that Africans were not learning African history until one of our panels, and I just asked the audience, do you all know who the Songhai Empire? The hands that went up were the Black Americans. Africans didn't know. And I'm like, what? But we know that because of colonialism, the education curriculum was designed to produce bureaucrats and laborers. In order to maintain the white supremacy that exists on this continent and in the world, we can't share the full story, the true story of our history, of our greatness, of how Africa is the cradle of civilization, the magnificent things that we accomplished before, like Egypt was conquered, and some of the other ancient civilizations. I would love to see a curriculum on African history developed, because kids should be learning it, and that should be mandated by the African countries, in my opinion, that they know their history, because the African history is a glorious history. It's a history of which we can be proud. And you want kids to know that they are worthy as Black people. We are worthy. Because so many, you hear, all they want to do is run to America. And I'm like, are you crazy? It's like, and, you know, then you have to explain to them what's really going on in America, and especially for Black men, it's not a good place to be. You have people like the governor of Florida who wants to start lying about our history. He wants to teach children that the slaves had a chance to learn skills when they came over here. And I'm like, the slaves had skills before you stole them. In fact, one of the reasons they took my people from Sierra Leone was because we were known as being great rice growers. And now you have a situation in Africa where in Sierra Leone, they're importing rice from China. What is that? So if that's not leadership, a problem with leadership, of course we do know too that threats are made against African leaders.
I still think about what you just mentioned. Like, it's so hard for, especially because I was raised by political activists here, and it's so hard to ever, like, for a generation to see political activists live long enough. It doesn't matter what opinion you have. Mm-hmm. Now it's even much more harder, not locally, but even harder if you have Pan-African views, because it's just not possible to have a political view as an African. So it's, and then it goes back, like, if Africans are corrupt, if these countries are corrupt, I think there's a way to solve them internally. Like if you give a country a time enough for it to to figure out the right leadership, for the people to finally have a voice to vote into what they want their country to be, these issues can be addressed, you know. But most of the African countries, that story has not started. So like you will always see blood and war and corruption and all of it, because it doesn't matter who's in power, like they will still be corrupted.
May I address that? The reason for that is because there's interference from the West.
Exactly.
Excuse me, let me land, I'm still flying. Let me land. There's interference from the West. Okay? So if Africa was to be allowed to run its business, to benefit from its resources, they will get it together. You know, America and these has been around for what, 400 and something years, and it's still trying to figure things out. You understand? These countries, post-colonial, they're not even running themselves, because at the end of the day, the West puts puppets in place. And until they have their own leaders, they cannot be responsible and move their country forward. Because there's always interference from the West. Just like you said, every time that there's a Pan-African, they kill them. Who's killing them? CIA.
And who is CIA?
And who is CIA?
America.
Exactly.
America KKK.
Yes. So this is the first African country that I've ever been to. And I am retired, I'm 75 years old.
No.
Yes. And the reason that we came, my husband and I, to Rwanda, is because of Paul Kagame.
Yes.
And his standing on the world stage.
Yes.
And the things that he stands for, and how he stands up to the West. And so I'm saying to myself, this is a country that I want to invest in.
Yes.
I want my retirement to be spent working in tandem with Paul Kagame's vision for Africa. So it starts with this itty bitty country that is landlocked. I never thought I would live in a landlocked country, because I like the beach. But here I am in a landlocked country, and the only reason that I'm here is because of the vision of the leadership. I regard government as oppressive. America has an oppressive government.
Yes, they are.
They're giving my tax dollars, and I pay a lot of them, to Ukraine.
Thank you very
But
much.
America does not have universal health care. We don't have a decent educational system. So if we care about the future, I would say that I would invest my energy in trying to see how I could get other African countries that are struggling to adopt the model of Rwanda.
That's right, sister. Go ahead, sister. That's beautiful.
And I have to tell you something that was very surprising even to me. This is the first time I felt patriotic towards a country because of our history in the United States. Of course, the slave trade, the Jim Crow, the lynchings, the beatings, the murders that don't get punished. In my opinion, Black Americans have been victims of domestic terrorism since the time we landed on the shores of the United States. And I'm like so done with that. I'm retired, and I thought, you know, how much energy do I want to continue to put into trying to convince white people to do the right thing, trying to convince them not to hate me or my brothers and sisters. I'm like, how much effort do I really want to put into that? And I decided none. None, I'm done with that. I'm still concerned about what goes on in the United States because I have friends and family there. But I really don't ever want to, I have to go back next year. And I really don't want to go. I really do not want to go. I find myself, as I'm thinking about and planning the trip, Where can I go where I won't be subject to mass shooting? I mean, those kinds of thoughts are in my head. And living here in Kigali, you don't have to worry about those things at all. And it's very peaceful. One of the things that I was struck by is there's a strong military and police presence here. And some people would say, well, that means it's a military state. But actually, after learning a little history, a little Rwandese history, one of the previous, I'm going to say king, is it Mwami? Yes. Okay, yeah, one of the Mwamis. And I apologize for forgetting the name. But he was responsible for establishing outposts of military around the country to keep it safe from foreign invaders. Okay, so the military presence is not new. It's not a military state, but this is a country of people who I believe are very intelligent and who think about things, who think about the bad things that can happen and have tried to protect themselves. And of course, we don't need to talk about what happened in 1994, and nobody wants to see that happen again. I grew up in the United States. I was born in Los Angeles. I come from a family of activists. My father was a self-taught expert on Black and African history, African American and African history. I grew up attending some of the gatherings that he had where they discussed African history. During the 60s, virtually everybody in my family was doing something. We were part of the Black Student Union, Black Panther Party, labor rights groups. Everybody was doing something. I went to graduate school and I obtained a PhD in clinical psychology. I'm also a registered nurse. At some point, I started feeling a longing, like something was missing in my life story. I grew up when we were moving from colored to Negro to Afro-American, then African-American. So I lived through all that. But I realized Africa is a large continent. And just saying that I'm African American doesn't really speak to what part of Africa. Well, I know it's going to be West Africa because of the slave trade, but it doesn't speak to the particular country. Who were my people? And so along comes this program called AfricanAncestry.com, where they have a very large database of DNA. And they can match your DNA, generally speaking, with someone from Africa. So I decided that I wanted to know. And I found out that on my mother's side, I'm from the Timni people of Sierra Leone. And on my father's side, I'm from the Mbundu people of Angola, representing them. Knowing meant I had to meet them, okay? So that's why in 2018, I made my first trip to Africa, and I went to 5 countries, starting with Sierra Leone. And I decided that, since I'm on the continent, I shouldn't just go to Sierra Leone and go home. So I went to the next 3 contiguous countries. So I went to Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. So it was while I was in Ghana that I met a woman who was running a resort called One Africa. And her name is Amicus Okafu. And she had been living on the continent for over 30 years and had started this business in Ghana. And while I was there, I went to visit her. And we started talking, and I was telling her about how I was actually thinking of moving to Africa. And she told me about Rwanda. And when she started telling me about Rwanda, a ban on single-use plastic since 2008, cleanest country in Africa, and over 60% of the parliament was female, I'm like, that's my country. Those are my values. And so I said, well, that's my country. And I didn't even come visit before I moved here in 2021. I didn't need to. I felt like I said, with those kinds of values, this is a progressive country and a country I want to be a part of.
When I think about democracies, they're not perfect. But again, even when we look at it in the context of Africa, when I think of the countries that are flourishing and the ones that people want to visit, do business and live in, what do a lot of them share in common? Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, Botswana is a very good example, the Seychelles, Mauritius. Democratic countries here, on average, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, it seems to be doing something right, in my opinion.
Getting back to your point about these countries that work with democracy in Africa, I lived in Ghana for 10 years, and trust me, darling, it's quite corrupt. That's why I ran here.
Yes.
It's very corrupt.
Thank you.
So unless you're in the system and you're experiencing the corruption and you see it, because if you watch the news, they're going to tell you, they're going to feed you a Hollywood story. And we all know that Hollywood is fake.
That I think as Africans, when we talk about practical decisions, and I very much blame the European countries, and I very much think most of where we're coming from, they have contributed to how hard we have to work to get back. The biggest problem for me has always been about us. Like when we educate ourselves, when we ask ourselves, like, historically, how these countries continue to exploit, that we forget that even when we hold the power, there's so much debate in schools where I went through that we cannot just, without the influence of the Belgium and the German, that we refuse to learn our own history.
Thank
that
you.
we refuse
Thank
to create.
We've been doing
And that's where
research about other Pan-African groups on the continent. And one of the things that I'm seeing that's very distressing is that a lot of them have ties to European organizations. And to my way of thinking, you cannot be free of European domination if you're taking their money, because their money comes with strings attached, okay? And we need to understand that. I guess I see the main task before us is to persuade governments to implement curricula that are going to help their students reject white supremacy, which is what they're being taught now, and accept themselves as being worthy and worthy of change, worthy of inheriting an Africa in which the rich resources of this continent are used for the benefit of the people. I don't think that's too much to ask.
You remind me of an African queen. I was heard about and sell the scene, but I can't see you now. So beautiful you are.
Lighter in the air, bright like a flare. The woman them pull up from them enter the door, man a stare. Outfit tailor made, own designer gear. Reach the rest and store them late next year. Lick, 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 man a lick up them lips. all of them I wish we have that day. Caribbean dish, oh man, you bring the heat in the atmosphere. Past 2 minutes, not one of them blink. Like if them ever blink, them would disappear. That did happen, just to run you down with be them career. But that they are no nothing, even if them end up poor, broke, and full of fear. Them sell off the house, the keys with the legs, put jewelry upon the wrist. Them woulda try anything just to be next.
You remind me of an African queen. I was heard about and sell the sea.